Perfect. Perfect.
I'm enjoying.
Are we ready yet? Hi, I'm Steve Pleich, and welcome to this edition of Voices from the Village. As you may know, Voices is the premier and long-running live issues program in community television. We've been at it now for about 17 years, and we're changing things around just a little bit. Our production team now is through BTS Productions, Brian Schulman, and his good offices, and we're breaking the program into a couple of segments so he can then publish it on YouTube every week, so we can kind of see what's going on. This evening, we're looking at our community, and the subject matter is looking forward in Santa Cruz. And I have a couple of folks who are going to be play substantial roles in the future of Santa Cruz. Chief Andy Mills.
Hey, how are you?
Welcome, Andy. And Vice Mayor and Council Member Justin Cummings. Justin, welcome. Before we look forward to see you talk about some of the really challenging issues in our community, when we take a look back a little bit, you've been with us now for a couple of years. What's that been like for you in your transition, not only as chief, but as a law enforcement officer and just as a citizen of Santa Cruz?
Well, as you know, Santa Cruz is just an amazing city.
Oh.
And I think there's just so much to offer and so many great people. But we also have some significant issues and some urban problems in a fairly small city. So those become challenges that we as a community need to think through, figure out how to address these things, and then move forward in a thoughtful way. So it's been both very interesting, steep learning curve, but at the same time, I think that this has been a great fit for Kathy and myself.
Wonderful.
And we love living in Santa Cruz and being part of this community and being part of this department, which I think is an incredible police department.
Yeah.
So.
And a shout out to Kathy, who's here with us, a very prominent and visible person downtown with you all, because you both live downtown.
Right.
So it's wonderful. And Justin, elected in 2018, so this is your first year in office. What's it been like for you in your transition from an academic when you were at UCSC to being an elected official and vice mayor?
I mean, it's been, I don't know. I mean, speak to anybody who has to work two jobs.
Right.
Yeah. Has it been easy? No. However, I very much enjoy the position that I'm in.
Right.
I think that it's an honor and a privilege to be able to be in a capacity where I get to make decisions and help move the city of Santa Cruz and our community forward. It's difficult, but at the same time, I enjoy it very much.
Yeah.
I enjoy the different people that I have to engage with, the different sectors of the community that I get to engage with, learning more about the history and just the community in and of itself. So that's what I would.
Beautiful, and of course your duties are going to increase exponentially next month when you are sworn in as mayor, if things go as they traditionally do with the vote this month. So looking forward to seeing your tenure as mayor. I think most people would agree that your service to the city has been honorable and honest in the last years since you were elected, so we hope that will continue, and certainly we think that it will. But let's look at some of the challenging issues now. I ran, as you know, for supervisor last year, but I ran for city council in past years, and one of the issues that we always talked about in the campaigns, as much as anything, until really the advent and the importance of affordable housing to come up, is public safety. And that's just something that's really on everybody's mind. And in Santa Cruz, we've gone to an area policing program. And Andy, give the people a little bit of a refresher course on how area policing works and what your assessment of it is, at least in this first period of time.
So we went to the community about a year and a half ago and asked for the community's priorities. What do they see in their neighborhoods? And then the thought process is to divide up the city in a way that we could police those specific problems in those neighborhoods. We were into some staffing issues that hurt that effort, and so we had to take it from 5 to 3 areas, and now we have a sergeant in charge of every area, and those sergeants are just doing a phenomenal job. They really address a lot of problems, but and this is typical of any policing agency where you identify problems, you try to solve those problems, you run into barriers and roadblocks, you figure out a way around those roadblocks and barriers, and try to solve these problems from the longer term perspective. We use a model of policing called problem-oriented policing, and we're having the 29th International Problem-Oriented Policing Conference right here in Santa Cruz next week. And 350 people from all over the world will be here talking about problems and how they've solved them, and that part of policing is really important. So having all those issues, working through them, I believe that we're making progress. Albeit not as fast as I would like to see. And Carter Jones has downtown with Rangers and CSOs, and then John Bush has the west side, and Dan Forbes has the east side. And
as I have said, my observation of downtown has been, I think that the conditions there have been improved quality-wise. I think that downtown is somewhat safer than it has been in the past, and I personally think that Carter Jones is doing one of the better jobs that I've seen. He is terrific. You work with, not for, of course, and they don't work for you, but you work side by side with law enforcement of the police department. How is your view and analysis of area policing in terms of increasing public safety, Ben?
I'm sorry.
Yeah. What is your analysis, your observation of how area policing has perhaps changed the nature of public safety in Santa Cruz?
Well, I would just say in general, I think that Santa Cruz, in terms of the way public safety has been run in our police department, I would say has been very well. I just really think that the way that so I grew up in Chicago.
Right.
And I just saw the way that when I was growing up, the way the police officers treated children and young people, the reports that we would get, there was a lot of harassment that was happening and taking place, and I don't see that happening here as much. I'm not going to say that those calls don't come in, because I've had reports come in to me, but at the same time, the level and degree to which the police department has integrity and really tries to work hard at trying to deal with the situations as they come up, and really try to respectfully approach all the circumstances that they're dealt with, I think is exceptional. And I very much am appreciative of the work that our police department does and continues to hold themselves. And next year, I very much hope to be able to engage more with the police department and work with them so that we can continue to maintain a very high level of integrity within our city and our community.
There's a couple issues I want to talk about in terms of public safety, and you were just on a panel Friday a week ago at the RCNV about facial recognition.
Sure.
And the ACLU, of which I'm a board member, has a model surveillance program that they would like to see adopted by cities and counties and whatnot. Tell us a little bit about whether or not the possibility of getting an ordinance in Santa Cruz that would somehow regulate facial recognition technology.
So I was on a panel a couple weeks ago, and the other day I actually met with Chief Mills and brought it up to Chief Mills that I've been on this panel and that this is something that I wanted to discuss and see that we try to address facial recognition. It's not perfect currently, and there are a lot of concerns from a lot of people around the idea that we can use people's that there are cameras around constantly watching you, And I think the biggest issue, and this is something that I mentioned at the when I was on the panel, is that it's not about who is in charge currently and who has access to that data currently. You don't know who down the line will have access to that data.
Right.
And because of that, we have to be cautious.
Yeah.
And that was something that I expressed to the chief, I expressed on the panel,
Right.
and that's the stance that I currently hold, which is why I'm currently not in favor of having facial recognition, and would like to work with some of my colleagues on the city council, work with the police chief in understanding how we can, for now, not have facial recognition be something that Santa Cruz has.
And Andy, before we get your views, let me remind the audience that this is a live call-in show, and you can call us at 425-8848 extension 630, 425-8848 extension 630, and ask either one of the panelists a question. So Andy, your views about surveillance generally and facial recognition technology, and perhaps even automatic license plate readers, which we have discussed from time to time?
Sure. So I think the bigger topic is the policy controlling surveillance equipment. And as Vice Mayor Cummings said, who has access to it, under what circumstances, and for what purposes. And so if you create the policies that limit what the police can do and what they can be used for and under what circumstances, that builds in protections. Now, then you have to drill down to each of the technologies that are available, such as facial recognition technology. I think it's pretty widely accepted in the police profession that the artificial intelligence behind it is not there. And so we don't want mistakes. If you arrest somebody because your camera is telling you, hey, this is a wanted person, and they wind up not being wanted, you've got problems. And constitutional issues, Fourth Amendment, and so forth. So we don't want to be in that position. And I'm pretty cautious when it comes to those things. But again, as the Vice Mayor said, it's not who's in charge now. It is somewhat who's in charge now, but it's also who's going to be in charge of the future.
Right.
So you have to build the protections around that. But it also extends to drones. It extends to license plate readers, stingrays, cellular intercepts. I mean, there's a ton of technology out there that could be used. And so building the policies around it, I think, is important. And once you build the policies around it, and you're sure that those policies are going to be followed, then I think you're a little bit more comfortable with taking a look at each of these technologies and saying, is it right for this community at this time?
All right. And another issue, do we have a studio audience question? Coral,
yes.
please, go ahead.
Can you hear me? Okay.
I think so. Can we hear Coral? It's Coral Brunin, ladies and gentlemen. She has a question for either Andy or Justin.
Identity recognition there. I've spoken with Justin, and I've met Chief Mills, and I've spoken to Steve Pleich. I'm a citizen of Santa Cruz, and I live in a place that has multi-cameras, maybe over 50. And I want to know, how does that work with the police department when we have a lot of break-ins, and there's been almost undeniable truth that the bike thieves or the break-in people, the thieves, various things that they've been doing are not dealt with by the police department. And so that leads me to believe, is it up to the rangers, then go through the police, or how would you describe working with an apartment complex that has cameras?
Okay.
Well, there are thousands of cameras all over the city. And these cameras record a lot of information from city-owned cameras, like in the parking structures and at City Hall and the police department, to the Ring cameras on a lot of people's homes, to surveillance cameras for businesses. Each of those are controlled by different people. Nobody is actively monitoring these cameras. For us anyway. We don't have a person squirreled away in a room watching a bank of cameras. London does that, and other cities, and it has helped with safety because you're able to identify problems before they start and intervene. But that's extremely costly. which I don't think our city can afford right now, and then very time consuming, which we can't afford right now. So that's not taking place. So consequently, what happens if a crime takes place, we go and we seek out where, if there are cameras, and then get that camera footage, view that camera footage, and just because somebody's on camera doesn't mean we know who they are. Sometimes we do, and sometimes we don't. Now, if there's facial recognition technology, the camera might say, hey, that's Andy Mills. But again, we don't have that. And it's not at a place where that can be done that way. So what we wind up doing is getting that footage, forwarding it to all the other police officers and say, if you see this person, then we need you to intervene and you know, do a field interview, get the identity, go back to the victim, do a photo lineup, they identify the person, then they can go to the DA's office for, and they could issue the complaint, they may not, but that's up to them. So that's the process behind it.
Interesting, thank you. One other thing I wanted to mention, maybe a couple things on the issues public safety, and that is that you've mentioned, and you're very vocal. If anybody really wants to know your mind, all you have to do is read your blogs. You know, you're very articulate, and your narrative is very broad in terms of, you know, what you think is important for people in Santa Cruz to consider and the challenges moving forward. Recently, you were talking about, unfortunately, with the latest tragedy having to do with gun violence. You're talking about promulgating, developing some gun control measures. Tell us a little bit about that, if you will.
So, you know, with the threats both locally and regionally and nationally with gun violence, we have to do more as a community, as a public and as a government, to limit the carnage that is exposed by gun violence. You're 77, I'm trying to remember the data that I gave to council on this, but I think you're 77 more times more likely, or 70% more likely to be the victim of suicide if you own a gun. That you're 3 times more likely to be the victim of gun violence if you have a gun in the home. I mean, these statistics, you know, could go on and on. And after the Gilroy shooting, I just thought it was important to speak up as a police chief and as a law enforcement officer that we need to do more. So we're looking at some pieces of legislation I brought to the Public Safety Committee, so we have it back at the City Attorney's Office now to take a look at that legislation and to see the efficacy of doing something like this. Like, for instance, strict liability policy. Like, if you have a dog and it's a vicious dog and he bites somebody, there's strict liability. You will get sued and you will lose. Could we do the same thing with firearms? I think we can. If you leave a firearm laying around. We need to tighten up some laws, such as you can't leave a handgun in the car, but you can leave an AK-47 in the car. And so those are the kind of things I think we can tighten up. There are 4 or 5 that we move forward to the Public Safety Committee to take a look at those. Some of them are kind of complex and some of them are risky from the city's perspective, from the standpoint of if we get sued, it could cost us, you know, 7 figures. So we want to proceed carefully, but with sure footing, and make sure that we have the right direction on that. And
Justin, as mayor and as a council member, any legislation that's promulgated or suggested by the police department is going to come before council. And you have, I'm sure, as we all do here in Santa Cruz, a very strong pro legislation lobby about guns. So what's going to be your position on that when they come before you?
Well, I'm going to listen to the sides of the argument and do what's best for our community. I mean, first and foremost, I mean, we really need to make sure that we're protecting the people of Santa Cruz the best way that we can. And personally, if there are laws that we can promote that will help the people in our community become safer from gun violence, I don't care who they come from, whether it's, you know, the ACLU or the police department. We need to work together to try to figure out what's going to keep our community safe.
I would agree. And just one final topic. As you know, and Justin, you probably know, I sit on the Chief's Advisory Committee, and we are advising the Chief about policies and kind of policing in certain ways. I have always wanted to kind of push that committee toward more of a citizens police review board, as we have had in the past, had in 2002 here. Just very quick, Andy, your opinion of the efficacy of citizens police review boards?
It depends on how it's done.
Yeah.
If it becomes a political tool, it's not a good idea.
Yeah.
But if it becomes a genuine oversight board with people with expertise who can look at these events and then guide us, I think it's a worthy idea. I would also suggest us talking with someone like Sam Walker, who's probably the foremost knowledgeable person in the nation on police oversight. Literally has written the books on it.
Yeah.
He's at the University of Nebraska at Lincoln, and I've sat in his home and talked with him about this before, and so I think there is value.
Yeah.
But I want to know what's effective, not what makes people feel good.
Yeah. And Justin, you have an opinion about the efficacy of Citizens Police Review Board as it applies to Santa Cruz?
Honestly, like, I have not had that much experience with a Citizens Review Board. I think that similar to what the chief has said, like, I don't think that we should have commissions or committees or review boards that are going to work in a way that it's a political tool. I think that what we need is to have people who are honestly, objectively looking at how we are running our cities and how we are running, functioning as a community.
Right.
And if we're going to be able to have a review board that's going to do that, then sure.
Yeah.
But if we're going to have something that's going to be a political tool, it's going to try to shift narratives in one way or another, then absolutely not.
And I think I wasn't really involved in politics in Santa Cruz when they had the original police review board, but my understanding was that one of the things that limited its effectiveness was it was so politicized, and so eventually it was just disbanded because for those reasons. Let's shift gears a little bit into a topic that really everybody's talking about now, and that's homelessness. It's my understanding this year that there is not currently on the boards a winter shelter. We do have the 60 tents at 1220 River Street. We have the 40 bed spaces at Laurel Street Salvation, but it does not look like we'll have the 60 extra spaces at VFW. Chief, from an enforcement standpoint, is the lack of emergency shelter space in Santa Cruz make your enforcement duties more difficult?
Well, certainly, it makes it more difficult, but right now we don't have a camping law on the books. City Council thoughtfully struck that down because of the Martin versus Boise decision. Until there's adequate bed space,
Right.
It becomes pretty difficult for us to do. And so, we're not running around writing tickets to people who are camping because there's not there's not anything for us to cite them
Right.
under.
Yeah. And the one thing I wanted to ask you about, Justin, is that there had been some talk about a day center. And the day center would be a place for homeless folks to be able to come during the day, access some services, kind of lay their burdens down a bit, and get themselves prepared to get back maybe into some employment, some housing, some benefits. Oh, and before you answer that, because I know you got a good answer for it, you had another question, Coral? Please.
I wanted to ask Andy Mills. This is a question that another group at a few people wanted to know about. I've been reading. It's been published that there's several hauling away of cars with expired registrations and other things about the car that makes it illegal. So, are you instructing officers to offer shelter to those people who will become homeless after their car gets hauled away? And wouldn't this affect public safety in a broader way? There would be more homeless, and then later I have a question for Justin. But thank you.
So, thank you for your question. And the question is, are we, towing vehicles away, and are we offering them things instead? It's interesting. For the last several months, we have not been able to tow vehicles with expired registration because the tow companies refuse. We had it about 4 months ago where we could, and then we filled up the lot. We couldn't any longer, and now we've got it back to a place where we can tow vehicles again. And this has been a difficult process. I get scores of complaints from community members, people who are sensitive, caring people, but who are afraid when their children have to go outside and see somebody urinating out of their motorhome in their front yard. This is unacceptable in our society. So we get lots of those complaints. I asked the officers to go out there and enforce the laws that are currently on the books. So in other words, we're not enforcing camping, but you cannot drive a vehicle on the roads in California that's expired over 6 months. Period. We didn't create this law; the state legislature did, and so we're enforcing that. And when they're writing tickets to those folks, regardless of whether they're housed or unhoused, and at the same time, for those that are unhoused, especially in the areas where people are parking, we're offering Associated Faith Communities Safe Parking Program.
Yeah.
We put flyers on each and every one of those cars and offered it multiple times to people, and the response was, "I don't want to go there." Well, we have to have a very balanced approach, and the balance is compassion with enforcement. And so we are going to do enforcement. But again, it has to be balanced. These are human beings. We have to have the compassion to go with it. But there also has to be the enforcement side, and I think it's been unbalanced in that there hasn't been a great deal of enforcement because we've had obstacles in the way, but we removed the barriers. And now the barriers we're towing again.
And it's an interesting point that you make, that you are enforcing the law. There was AB 516 was before the state legislature, which would have at least curtailed, if not eliminated, poverty tows. That did not pass. So the state hasn't really taken the lead in this and said, no, you cannot do that, giving you direction about what it is that you can do. Did you have a question for Justin very quickly? Oh, are we taking a break? Okay. And we'll come back in just a moment. And I want to ask Justin about the day center, and we have much more to talk about. So come back and join us again.